Hello and welcome to another video here on the International Dream, where we're looking at the road to 2026 once again. I'm joined by English football expert Ben Dimmock.
Expert feels like perhaps slightly premature, but I'll take the compliment anyway, mate.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. Ben and I have been talking about doing a video and probably a series of videos. When England comes up, Ben is probably the guy I'll have on the other end of the call. Um, and as a Welshman, um, of course, I felt I had to have somebody on the other side of the discussion to drown out my forced pessimism, perhaps. But yeah, so how are you? How are you feeling about the World Cup and how are you feeling about Thomas Tuchel?
Do you know, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic. I think it's very easy to feel like we're always going to be the nearly team. Um, However, I actually am I'm viewing it as we've had a lot of progression. More in my lifetime than the previous 30 years combined. So I think there's something to be said for that. And that was with as much as I love Gareth Southgate as a person, and what I think we need to appreciate what he did for the England setup, bringing back the players' love for playing for their country. I think there's a lot to be said for that. He obviously had some tactical downsides and weaknesses that were always going to hinder the team.
Am I right in
And
saying that you were quite pro Southgate generally?
generally, yes, I think unfortunately, I have to admit, he was probably the reason that they lost certainly the reason they lost the 2021 Euro final, which they should have won. That's the key difference there. They had no right to beat Spain in the last Euros. They had no right really to be in the final. That was just a combination of luck and just fortunate draws once again. But in 2021, they really should have been winning that match on home soil. They had the best defensive record in the competition up to that point. They had the better squad than Italy, and I think unfortunately it was what it always came back to was his desire to keep the handbrake on and set up shop as soon as they got an early lead. So often for that team, the worst thing that could happen was get an early goal, get an early lead. Same thing happened in Croatia, and unfortunately, we saw the first signs of his inability to adapt properly mid-match, where he failed to get rid of the back five that had served well up until that point until the Croatia match, and then in extra time, I think really they could have done with just going to the traditional 4-3-3 rather than trying to sit back again, which just allowed Luka Modric to run the show. So
I, yeah, I think with
we saw it
2018,
time and time again.
yeah, with 2018, that one especially, I think people forget that pre-tournament, that was probably the most unfancied England team
Yes,
I
it
can
was.
ever remember because
Yeah,
2014 was a disaster. Euro 2016 was arguably even worse, even though they made it out of the group. They
it
beat
was.
Wales, they lost to Iceland,
Yeah,
and then by
which is
by
one of the biggest
28,
embarrassments for the team ever.
yeah, and then by 2018, Wayne Rooney's gone. Who say what
Yeah.
you will about his performances for England after his young years, which were pretty disappointing at major tournaments, if we're being honest.
Yes.
But he was gone. He was the star player, and he was gone. It's a much younger team, led by players like Harry Kane and Dele Alli, who were playing for Spurs. It wasn't a
Yeah.
team of world beaters at all. And
A better Spurs than the one we've had in recent years, but still they were not winning trophies. They were not winning tournaments.
no, and I think 2018 was probably, and this is going to sound crazy, reaching the semi-finals with that team was probably Southgate's biggest achievement. And I think
Yeah,
obviously they only beat Panama, Tunisia, Colombia on penalties, which I think that game was massive because Colombia really
yes.
were probably as good a team. I know James Rodriguez was injured for that game, but probably as good a team as England, if not even slightly better,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah,
Um,
and with to put up with the kind of the dark arts and the appalling behavior of the Colombian players is no small feat. Because it's something they just hadn't
mm,
really experienced before, particularly given that almost all the players were Premier League players, where you don't really get experience that sort of behavior, and they were really rattled. But more importantly, it was that mental hurdle of getting over winning a World Cup penalty shootout, which was
yeah.
just priceless to them.
And I think that Sweden team was pretty good. Like they
They
battered
were
a
good.
Mexico team that beat Germany and,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
on almost, pushed Brazil pretty close as well. And that Sweden team, they didn't have any world beaters, but they were really well drilled and England dispatched them. And I think really comparatively to the Italy game, I think England were very unlucky against Croatia. I think that was less
They
Southgate's
were.
fault. And I think it was more one pretty bad lapse from Kieran Trippier at the back, which allowed,
Mm.
was it Mandzukic or it was Mandzukic, wasn't it? The winner.
For the yes,
And
yes, that man, no, Perisic was the winner, wasn't he? I think if I remember correctly.
I can't remember, but whichever goal Mandzukic scored, Trippier
Yeah.
just had this lapse and he just didn't follow him. And then Mandzukic
Yeah.
was free. It was one of those, and I think that Croatia team is the stuff of legends. Not just
Remarkable thing.
Luka
Just
Modric obviously was the best player, but Rakitic was absolutely brilliant in that
yeah.
tournament. So was Brozovic, so was
Mhm.
Perisic, and players like Ante Rebic, who did nothing afterwards, was
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic throughout that tournament. So yeah, I mean, then you look at the home Euros where again they had that was probably the most kind draw that they had from
It,
front to
yes.
back. And that's, I
Yeah.
think, the main reason that people say they should have won it because they never really played a top team. Italy were a top team in the sense that
Hmm.
they had gone, what, 2.5 years unbeaten or something going
Yes.
into that
Yes.
tournament. But it was
Yeah.
still Ciro Immobile up front, who the Italian
Yeah.
fans
No
never
stars
stopped slagging
really.
off. They were
Yeah.
complaining about him throughout that tournament, and then they won it.
Yeah.
Um, they had a good
And
midfield
people
with
were saying their
Verratti.
best player. Well, people were saying their best player was Jorginho, which I mean had a great career, but he's not the kind of player you would expect an Italian side to be relying on more than anyone else. And Chiellini was it's one of my favorite ever defenders, but of course he couldn't move in that. But it turns out he didn't need to.
But he was still very good, and that was I think that was the
Yeah,
tournament as a bit of a tangent. That was the tournament that popularized the high fiving and celebrating tackles, which at the time was
yeah,
very charming. Now it drives me
mhm,
nuts.
yes, overdone.
Yeah, but anyway, and then you had Qatar 2022, which I think was another one where I think England were brilliant, and I think arguably
They
that was
were.
the best England team we've seen under Southgate was Qatar 2022.
I think
They
some of their best
absolutely
performances. Yes,
Yeah, I mean the USA game was shit, but the Iran,
it
the
always is
Wales, and the
against America
Senegal,
in.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, the Iran, Senegal, and the Wales games, they played all three of those teams off the park, and none of them were bad teams.
Yeah.
Well, Wales played terribly, but Iran and Senegal were, they were plucky teams, and England
Hmm.
just absolutely brushed them aside. And France, on another day, they beat them, and then it's Morocco in the semi-finals, and
Yeah,
France pushed
yeah,
Argentina all the way in the final. So you never know. I think Qatar
yeah.
2022 was, even though they went out in the quarterfinals, it was probably, they didn't go as far as any other tournament under Southgate, but I think it was the best set of performances.
Yes, I do completely agree with that. I think it's the best we've seen them. It just goes to show, though, what happens when they come up against one of the very top sides, that they've never really been able to do it. The best team they've beaten on in the Southgate era was Germany, but of course that was still nothing compared to the Germany teams of old.
Well, I'll disagree with you slightly there because I do think the Dutch team they beat in the semi-finals of the Euros, that was a great result. And I
They
know
are a good team, yeah,
I know
but
that
they
was
were
a
kind
Dutch
of
team.
gifted it.
Yeah, they did finish
Yeah.
third in their group and still
Mhm.
qualified, but
Yeah.
going into the knockouts, the Dutch had a lot of momentum and they
Mhm.
hammered Romania. They beat a very, very solid Turkey team.
Yeah.
And England outplayed them, which doesn't really happen in knockout games.
But they were gifted a penalty, to be fair. The first game penalty, yeah.
They were, yes, they were, but that's not where
See,
they write
that
the
does
history books
happen.
about.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe it was payback for the Kane miss against France. Who knows?
maybe, maybe.
But all that to say, that's all Gareth Southgate, and I think what you have to say is, no matter what anybody says, didn't win anything, okay, but resounding success of
Yeah.
a period as manager. But it was the right time for it to end. Maybe after
Yes, it
Qatar
was.
was the right time for it to end. But then I can see why they thought there was
Yeah.
some positivity to take from Qatar.
There was, and it's understandable why he would want another go at the Euros, having come so close in previous tournaments. He was already at that point, even before the second semi-final. Sorry, it's the second final. He was already the second most successful English manager ever. So I think he did have the right to keep going because it's not like they crashed out with a terrible performance. They weren't humiliated. They were beaten narrowly by arguably the best international squad in the world. And they of course were the runners up that year, and it took penalties to beat them in the end. So they were just an outstanding squad. They're always the most I think intimidating team to come against now in international football. So I think he absolutely had the right to keep going because you could just tell how much he desperately wanted that just to get over the line, particularly given his history as an England player, the blame he got for that missed penalty in the Euros, even though he's a centre half. So I think it was perfectly valid for him to choose to stay, but I think it was his choice. I think either would have been fine. And the other thing I think we need to remember is I think it's slightly harsh to judge international managers on whether they've won something or not because it's so much harder to win something on an international level because there's only a tournament once every 2 years and with generally the best players in the world, especially if you're a European team, um, because with all due respect to the Copa America, the Euros has a greater selection of teams. And so it's really hard to win an international tournament. Very few managers do it.
Mm. Well, and the best international teams ever, like you think 2002 Brazil team, which
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, fair enough. The team they had was incredible, but
Yeah.
they a lot of those players only won one World Cup.
Yeah.
Some of them
Yeah.
were there for 94, but not many of them. And
Hmm.
I say only one. It's still great to win one World
Still
Cup,
great.
obviously, but
Messi's only got one, remember?
the Dutch team of 2010 with Robben and Schneider and Van
Yeah.
Persie, I don't think people were calling them failures to the level that they call this current England team failures. And
No. No.
I would say that, especially in attack, maybe not so much in defense, was a far more talented team than especially the 2018 and the 2021 England teams. Not the England team now, really, because now I think the expectation is justified because you got these
Yes.
massive big names in the
Massive
team.
superstars now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
But Netherlands have never won a World Cup, and they have some of the greatest players of all time.
yeah, just
So
the one
it
Euros
just
in
shows.
'88. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. That's it. Which is as many as England. Arguably, it's slightly less because it's a World Cup rather than a Euros. So it's just so
Well,
hard to win an international tournament.
the Dutch in 2002 didn't even qualify, and they had Ruud
Yeah,
van
yeah.
Nistelrooy and Clarence Seedorf and all these players, and they didn't even make it. So, yeah, I mean, I
Italy
think,
can't qualify anymore. They don't seem to
well,
know how to do it.
that's a topic for another video. But
Yeah, yeah.
I think we should talk about Thomas Tuchel because,
Mhm.
and this was a big pet peeve of mine, and I might be proven wrong with this, right? But all the noise about whether he'd play three at the back or four at the back, right?
Yes.
He was always going to play four at the back. He's played
Yeah.
four at the back throughout his career. The only time he played a three was at Chelsea, and that was only because the players he had suited that system. And it was like
Yes.
almost like I know he wasn't directly after Conte, but it was sort of like or was he after Conte? No, there was somebody else, but in between, wasn't there?
No, well, there's Lampard.
Lampard, that's who it was. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But it was kind of like there was still the remnants of Conte's philosophy
Yes.
in some,
Mhm.
although not that many of the players were still there. But
Mhm.
at Bayern, he played with a four at the back. But because we're so Premier League biased, everyone was questioning whether he'd play a three, and I was never really in doubt that he'd play a four. He
Mhm.
might still play a three, but what do you
Might do
think about?
occasionally.
what do you think about the appointment, and what do you think uh, of his system, and also the two recent qualifiers?
Yeah, well, I mean, the appointment of a German is a fascinating discussion, isn't it? So I think the most important takeaway is it doesn't reflect very positively on the FA in the sense that they can't find an English manager. I know that Eddie Howe would have been a good choice, but he's got a great job at Newcastle. But that's it, really.
Mm.
I was really hoping it wouldn't be Potter. With all due respect to Potter, I just don't
Well,
think that's what we need right
I
now.
think that idea is now completely gone because he's somehow made West Ham worse. I don't know how he's
Yeah,
managed it, but
yeah,
he's made them worse than Lopetegui made them look, which is
yeah.
impressive.
But it does reflect poorly on a nation of 60 million people, with some of the greatest players, particularly if you think there's a lot of really intelligent players like Frank Lampard, like Steven Gerrard, that you would think would make great managers, but they just don't. And it's disappointing, I suppose, that we can't produce a manager of a high enough caliber. However, I am all for this appointment because Tuchel was definitely the best manager they could get. I never for one second believed Pep Guardiola was in the mix. The only I think perhaps people thought there was a possibility because he's Catalan, maybe he wouldn't want the Spanish job, maybe he would want the England job more. Um, but I never thought that would, and also it wouldn't work because his style requires working with them every single day, week
Yeah,
in,
I
week
was
out.
just going to
It's gonna
say
work.
Pep's too much of a control freak to work in international management.
Exactly.
That's why people think Carlo Ancelotti is going to do it because he's the opposite. He just wants to turn up to
Yeah.
training, tell them, all right,
Yeah.
express yourselves, and then raise an eyebrow
Smoke
occasionally
a
on the
cigar.
touchline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
I agree.
I think that's why managers like Pep, and I don't see Klopp going into international management. I don't see
No. And
Conte
he'd
going
want the
back to
Germany job, I
international
think.
management. I know he did the Italy job, but I don't see him doing that again. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. And I think Tuchel's a great choice of because he's good in tournaments and this is always going to be a short term appointment. It's not meant to be for the long haul.
Well, yeah, I think they've
Or at least
basically
not right now.
resigned to the fact that he's going to leave after the World Cup, which is mental to me because
Yeah. Yeah.
they're not really going to have any games um, to prepare to playing against top opposition. And this is one thing that really puzzled me. They obviously had because they're in a smaller group, they've got two windows where they get friendlies, right? So I was
Mhm.
kind of expecting to see them match up against some big teams for some prep, but they're playing Senegal and Wales in those two friendlies. Two teams they played in
Mhm.
2022, funnily enough. But
Yeah.
so the group, you're looking at Serbia and Albania as the best other teams in there, and it's not going to be the preparation of playing the big teams. And then
No.
the
No.
questions are going to be asked again when they do play a big team. If they don't win, why weren't they given the
Yeah.
preparation time? And I think in
Yeah.
the end, it does come down to the fact that because they were so poor in the Nations League, and people say the Nations League doesn't matter, they
But it's great
weren't.
practice.
Yeah, and in the last window, because they got relegated, they played in a really poor group. Was
Yeah.
it Ireland and Greece and Finland? Was it? I know they lost to Greece, but they won the
Greece. I
rest of
can't
them.
remember all of
Yeah.
them now.
But
Yeah.
where that could
I
have
didn't think
been,
they.
it could have been Germany, the Netherlands, and
Yes.
Belgium or something, which would have
Yeah.
prepared them much
You
better.
need that experience because we've seen it at club level at the same time. I think that's why for so long PSG could never really do it in the Champions League because if you spend all your time playing at kind of 70% against weaker opposition, how are you going to turn it up to 100% when it matters most? And you need that experience. I know a lot of these players play against the best teams at club level, but that's in a different system with different teammates. They need that experience playing together against the very best. And the only time they have got to do that against the very best teams is when it's in a knockout game, when the pressure's on and it's all or nothing, and they haven't really been able to get over the line yet. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's that surprising.
So what were your first impressions of the first two games then for Tuchel?
Um, I think it was largely what I was expecting. I was pleased that the fans were so on board. I thought they would for starters. I thought they generally would be. I think they'll only turn and be frustrated with the hiring of a German manager if it doesn't work out. If the performances are really poor. Interestingly, I actually think the perhaps the Germans will be more resentful, the German fans, than the England, because I think English generally accept that we don't really have a great English manager that can take us to a World Cup
The
win. This
Germans
is
have
what we want. I
loads.
think
They're spoilt for choice.
they are. But how would the Germans feel if a German wins England a World Cup?
Yeah, I mean they have got Julian Nagelsmann, who is a fantastic manager
Yes.
in his own right.
Yeah,
But
he
I
is.
see your
He is.
point. I see your point.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think it was largely what we were expecting. They struggled a little bit against the low block against Albania at first, and it was a bit of that feeling of, oh God, is history going to repeat itself again? Has nothing changed at all? Particularly when he played a very similar formation to what Southgate was playing before, with the kind of the two holders. But then it was a good performance, and there were some really exciting parts. I think the most exciting part was Lewis Skelly's debut. I think that's really important given the troubles they've had at left back. And then Latvia, an admittedly weaker opponent than Albania. I think it was kind of what we were expecting. We could see that the handbrake really was being taken off. They really were just it they were really progressive in a way that we haven't seen for a while. There was none of that old kind of that that deep-seated fear of giving away possession and thinking don't try anything too risky because we just have to keep the ball at all times at all costs. So it's only two games, but I think it's quite promising, really. It was generally as good as we could have realistically hoped for. Yes, so I think it's wrong to expect a sea change all of a sudden. These players have spent almost all of their international career. In fact, pretty much all of them have spent their entire international career, with the exception of a few like Harry Kane, solely playing for Gareth Southgate. So this is the only way they know how to play in an England shirt right now. That will slowly be undone. We will see the Tuchel style coming in, but it doesn't happen immediately.
No.
We just got to be patient. And we've seen signs of it already, which is the most important bit.
Yeah. At least you can see us both now. The lights are nice and bright. Um, yeah, I think it's impossible to judge the team because even under Roy Hodgson, they were absolutely smashing the qualifiers.
Yeah. They
Like there was
always
no
do,
tomorrow.
generally.
So there's
Yeah.
no way to judge them based on games like this.
Hmm.
Which is frustrating for England fans because and for betting people because
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
how are you going to evaluate this team until you've seen it, you know? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it's personally I am not. I think Tuchel is a really good appointment, but
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that he's going to bring this like heavy metal handbrake off football that the England fans want. I think he's a little bit more pragmatic than say a Jurgen
Yeah.
Klopp. He can play attacking
Mhm.
football, but especially when the pressure's on, I don't think you want this super attacking, expressive football.
No.
I think that is kind of a misnomer. I think what people mean when they say that is when they do take an early lead is this almost passive fear
Yes.
that runs through the team.
Yeah.
It's not a pragmatism. It's more a psychological weakness, which I
It
think
is.
is
That's
where
exactly what it is.
that is where Tuchel will be able to hopefully
Yes.
go into them. But I think it's a high risk appointment as well because he's such a fiery character that if things do
Yeah.
start to go wrong, if there's a training ground spat, it's going to go public. There's no two
Which is
ways
why it's
about it.
short term. Hmm.
There's no two ways about it. If he and Jude Bellingham fall out, he's going to be
Yeah.
saying this and that about Jude Bellingham in press conferences.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't control Thomas Tuchel. That's the thing.
Where Southgate was never going to have that problem.
That's what Southgate worked so hard to create was the unity. And I
Yes.
think,
The players loved him. The players, I think, really wanted to win something, partly for him as much as themselves. You could see how much they wanted to win for him.
mm,
And perhaps there won't be that same mentality with Tuchel, but that's okay.
I think there's a respect for him at the moment. There's a big respect
Oh,
because he
for
got a big
sure.
name
Yeah,
manager in,
yeah.
and Kane's played with him already, so that's
As has
a
Reece
big thing.
James.
A lot of the players actually, Eric Dyer as well, if he ends
Yeah,
up coming back
Palmer.
into the setup.
No, sorry, not Palmer. What am I talking about? He was still at City. Not no,
Colwill,
yeah. To be
but
fair,
Colwill was he?
not
Would he have come up? I don't know. Yeah.
well. He would have been in a squad, surely. I was
Mm,
thinking Palmer would have been the same, but I forgot. No, no, no. He was
mm.
in the City squad at the time as a youngster. There weren't that many English players in Tuchel's Chelsea side. The most important ones were James and Chilwell, and of course Chilwell's long gone from the
And
picture
Mason
now.
Mount, he loved himself a bit of Mason
And
Mount.
Mason Mount, but Mason Mount's not really in contention anymore, unfortunately.
So yeah, it has been very interesting to see, and I think the big bombshell from his squad was Dan Burn, but I don't hate it. I think what I like about that selection is that it's very un-Southgate in the sense that
Yes.
Tuchel's looked at the players available and he's just sort of gone, why hasn't he been picked? And everyone
Yeah.
else has gone,
Yeah.
and Tuchel's just gone, well, he should be in the squad. And frankly, I
I'm
agree. I
on
think
board.
Dan Burn's a great player.
He
Um,
is. He is. I don't think he's the solution for England,
no, but he's
but
a good squad player.
give him a shout.
Yeah.
Yeah, give a bit like what Connor Cody always used to be, where he would massively raise the standards of the training squad because he's the ultimate professional and he would train harder than anyone else, knowing he's never going to get in the team. And I think people underestimate the importance of squad players. Where I remember Roy Keane a few years ago was saying, "What does he do? Card tricks?" Well, which I personally think, not that I want to disagree with a legend of the game too much, but I think that's slightly missing the point. Because no, you're not going to get every single player that goes will play a game. I doubt that's ever happened in the history of tournament football, to
Mm.
be honest. So there are always going to be players who sit on the bench the entire time, and can they bring something else? And I think it's most important to show players that if they play well enough, they are in contention no matter what.
Well, that's a great segue because now we're going to pick our combined England
Okay.
11 based on
Yes.
what we know today as of
Hmm.
the 21st of April 2025 as we're recording. We're over a year out still. A lot can change. I mean, Miles Lewis-Skelly has emerged from nowhere.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
could well happen again. I think about France with Desiree Doué. He was not even starting for the under 21s in the Olympics. And now suddenly he's in the plans to be maybe a starter. So
Yeah.
I think before we get into it, I think there are four, are there four or a, it's tricky. I think there are four players that are
Hmm.
guaranteed their spot.
I'm thinking there's more than that, to be
Well,
honest,
okay,
actually.
okay, let me rephrase it. There are four players that are guaranteed their spot in terms of their specific position. There are a couple other
Ah,
players that are
yes,
going to
I agree with
start.
that. Yes.
There are a couple of
Yes.
players that are going to start, but I don't know where they're going to play. And those four players are Jordan Pickford in
Hmm.
goal,
Yeah.
Declan Rice in holding
Yeah.
midfield, Bukayo
Hmm.
Saka on the right wing,
Hmm.
and Harry Kane up front.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not stupid. Jude Bellingham's going to start, but
Yes, obviously.
we'll get
Where
to
does he
that.
go?
We'll get to that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
right back.
Hmm.
Reece James has shown a lot for himself,
Hmm.
which is the only reason I don't think it's a guarantee. Also because he knows Thomas Tuchel.
Yeah.
But surely it's Trent, right?
I actually disagree because I think I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation in the midfield. And that will include often having less defensive coverage in it.
Mm.
When you do that, can you take the risk of Trent being at right back? And I think the other thing to consider is he's now going off to Real Madrid next season. I don't really know what his role will be there, and I'm not sure. We don't even know what his form will be like there because he
You
may not be
see,
playing every single game.
I think I disagree because as much as a Liverpool fan, I think Trent,
Mm.
he's a great player, but I think his impact is not the same from every game. But what I would say about him at Real Madrid and why I think it's a perfect fit is Danny
Mhm.
Carvajal is 32, 33. He's just torn his
Yeah.
ACL. He's buggered.
Hmm.
I'm sorry. He's going to come
Yeah.
back. He's going to play, but he's not going to be at the same level as he was before.
No, of course not.
And I think Trent was already a better player than Danny Carvajal overall.
He is, but not. He's not. He's not a better defender.
But my point is, the
Mhm.
player that Real Madrid have missed the most this season, except weirdly Hosselu maybe, which is a whole other tangent. But
Yeah, yeah.
Tony Kroos, who in
Hmm.
world football can ping a pass as well as Tony Kroos right now? Trent Alexander-Arnold.
Yeah.
I think as a deep lying playmaker, almost like a quarterback,
Hmm.
that's going to be his role.
I'd
And
say he is a quarterback at this point.
pretty much. So I
Yeah.
think Tuchel will see that skill and he will find the need to use it. So if you got Reece James at right back.
I'm very 50-50 on this one. I think I
Okay.
gave James the slight nudge for two reasons. One is the history with Tuchel and the fact that he was so influential in that Chelsea side that won him the Champions League. And I think the other one is just that at tournament football, any mistake can be hugely significant. And is he going to trust Trent Alexander-Arnold at right back when it matters most, when any mistake could be your undoing? I certainly would be delighted to see Trent play. I just don't know if it will happen. And there's a part of me that doesn't know if I would take the risk of. I'd certainly play him a lot. Whether I'd have him as my starting right back if England were playing France in a semi-final or a final, it's because no matter what, it will always be a risk. It could be the best decision you've ever made, but it could also be the thing that costs you the game.
I would also argue that starting Reece James could be a risk because of his injury
Well, it
history.
could because of his injuries. Well, this is the other thing. I've had to go on this assuming these players are fit, which I think is what we generally do when it's a long time in the future. Have long been saying I don't know whether James will ever be able to have a full England career anymore, just because he'll never be. I think it's rare that he will be in having played enough and be in a good enough form to take that into an international competition. Look what happened when they took um I've completely forgotten his name now. Luke Shaw in the
Hmm.
Euros, having barely played, could only walk on one leg at the start. Um, it is a huge risk, and unfortunately, sometimes you do have to accept that a player will never have the career that their talent deserves because of injuries. That said, I haven't fully written him off yet because we've seen him come back recently, and we've seen what he can do in an England shirt for Tuchel. So who knows? Who knows? But it is, I think this is one of the hardest decisions, and it always will be because of Trent's brilliance and his weakness.
I think what Tuchel, I don't think it's that hard a decision because I don't, I'm not convinced Reece James is that great defensively anymore, to be honest, after all his injuries. It's not like you're putting
Well,
Kyle
he's
Walker
always
in
get the
there.
risk too.
Kyle
Yeah,
Walker was a lockdown defender in his peak,
different kind of beast
but
entirely.
Reece James, and I think Trent offers so much more going forward. Reece James offers a lot, don't get me wrong, but Trent offers so much
He
more. To
does, he
me,
does.
it's not
Hmm.
really a decision. But
Yeah,
I also, yeah, it's tricky. We're gonna have to decide though. We're gonna have to.
yeah. I guess Reece James is more balanced. Before his injury problems, I always said I think he will be the best all-rounded
Mm.
fullback in the world.
Oh yeah,
Unfortunately, his injuries, I think, will negate that. But that was certainly the trajectory I thought he was on. And he still will always be more balanced than Trent, but basically every fullback at top level football is more balanced than Trent because he's
what
such a
Tuchel might
unique
look
one.
at though is like the City game where
Mhm.
Liverpool almost tactically allowed Trent to get beat and just made sure that the centre back was there to stop
Mm,
the cross. So it was almost
yeah,
like, well, we know that
but
Doku's
Liverpool have better centre backs.
true, but
Yeah,
but
England don't have Van Dijk. I mean, our best defender is consistently injured too, which is another talking point to come up to. I
what
guess that's the other thing.
can you concede to Trent or are you dead set on Reece
I think
James?
yes. No, I'm very happy to have Trent there. I don't see
Mhm.
it as a concession whatsoever. I just think it will always be a risk. It will always be a risk. but I think it's a risk I'm personally always happy to take because I think he's such a remarkable player. I think he's the most unique fullback
Mm,
football has seen in certainly 30 years, possibly ever.
yeah.
He's that unique.
All right. I owe you a compromise then. Right. So second, well, third part because Pickford was automatically picked.
Yeah, yeah.
Two centre backs. Who you got?
I've gone, and again, this is all assuming that everyone is fully fit. I've gone Stones and Grahey. I think I think Mark Gray was, for me, he was actually England's best player throughout Euro 2024. I was really concerned when he got that suspension. Now, fortunately, Conte stepped in and was also really, really solid and composed. But I was so impressed by Gray because he's had fairly little international experience and even less at an international tournament. And to step up like that as such a young player playing for a decent but not top level side of at Palace, I think was really, really remarkable. And he was I was blown away by him. Stones, I've said for a long time, is overall England's best defender. It's just again, are the injuries going to ruin him? I mean, he was just phenomenal when City won the treble. I think he was a huge part of that. That Champions League final performance was just on another level. Where I believe he was the first player since Messi to get about six dribbles in a Champions League final. So he's more than just an out and out defender. But under Pep, he's just risen to heights that you'd never expect. But it's the issue comes down to are the injuries gonna hit him harder and harder, and he's just never fit anymore, and he can't play as much anymore.
I think I've got Mark Gay. I've not got John Stones, and I
Have
think
you gone
this is
concert?
that. Yeah, I've got Konza and
Yeah.
Gay. So I think this is a
Mm,
trend here where you've picked Reece James, and I've just.
yeah.
I'm happy to go with John Stones if you want to go for John
I
Stones
mean,
because
had it between those two, and I am very torn. Overall, Stones is obviously the best of the three defenders. It,
I don't even know
I
if he is anymore because I think he doesn't even when he's fit he doesn't get a game for City this
That's
season.
'cause he's not really fit. Well, I think the problem is when he is finally fit, he's not been playing, so he's not going to get pushed straight back into the City lineup.
I think
So I
Konza
think
though
that
has
is
been
the big
so
problem.
good for so long, and I
He
think
has. Yeah.
we're seeing with Tuchel that he's prioritizing a more youthful, athletic approach,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't. You've already got Trent in that or Reece James. Either of them are not the most athletic at this point in their careers.
No,
Uh,
no,
if you put John Stones in it as well, I'm not sure. But
it is
in
risky.
terms of been there, done that tournament experience, I'm happy to go with Stones and Gay.
Well, this is what's so hard because I think, generally speaking, I think you do need an older, more experienced defender in that lineup. I know Pickford is obviously very commanding. Um, but yeah, I think you want a defender there, like what Maguire used to do for England before he lost his form completely, where you need that leader in the back line. And I think on form, I would be looking at Konza, and I think he's excellent. But with Konza and Guehi, do you have that leadership from the back?
And I think if with
And
Stones, you've got the big game mentality and the fact that
yeah.
he is a treble winner. Yeah, all right. I've convinced myself.
I think it's as
If
much the England experience, isn't it?
Hmm.
He's in the team longer than almost anyone. The only people who've been in there as long as him are Kane and Pickford, really. So maybe it comes down to that. But I would be more than happy with Konza as well. I think we'll have to see how Stones' fitness develops.
If Stones is fully fit, and I
Yeah,
think we're assuming if they're fully fit, I would still take Trent over James if they're both fully fit. If Stones is fully fit, he's got to start, but I just don't
I
think
think
he will
so.
be.
Yeah.
So, but
No, I
I
don't think it
think
will be either.
we're assuming that everyone's fully fit. So let's go Stones and Gay
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Konza.
yeah. Hypothetically.
Konza and probably Colwill make up the squad.
Yes.
Dan Burn maybe misses out, but yeah,
I think so. I mean,
yeah.
he's used. I think his height could be very very useful when set pieces are so
Mm.
important at international tournament football. But is that reason alone worth it? I
Probably
don't
not.
know.
Probably not.
Probably not. Probably not.
And then left back.
Mm.
I think this was much more of a debate until the Real Madrid Champions League tie. And I think Miles Lewis
Yeah,
Skelly was so good, even
yeah.
better than
Well,
he's
the whole
been.
team was, but
The
he in
whole team
particular,
was
yeah,
good. But
yeah,
I think aside from Rice and
yes.
Saka in the first leg,
Mm,
especially, he was the best
mm,
player on the pitch,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
astounding because he's 18.
yeah. I
And I
know, I
think
know.
because the left back spot was so open, I think he's now, especially because he started both games, I believe, of the
He
last
did, he
window.
did.
I
Hmm.
think he's got it down. He's only going
Yeah,
to get better, and he's
youngest
only going to get
debut
more.
goal scorer for England as well, and that's from full back position. It just shows that I think it just shows that his mentality is ready because there's always such a risk playing a young player, but he's doing it for Arsenal in the big games too, and he's doing it when the pressure's on when he's starting his England career, and I think that's really important. Lewis Hall in with a
I was
shout for
just going to
sure.
say Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento, both at Newcastle, are probably the other options you're looking at.
But I think now it is Lewis Skelly, which is why I think I went for Stones as well in the back line, because if you've got another very young and inexperienced player, they're all really talented, but they're young. I think you
Mm.
need that that kind of bigger
The guile.
experience figure to guide them through, yeah,
Yeah,
and to
well,
bark
fair
orders
enough.
at them.
So we got
Hmm.
Pickford, Trent, Gahey, Stones, Lewis Skelly. That all makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And again, things can change in 14 months. So
Yes.
we've got Rice because
Hmm.
that's one of our
Definitely.
guarantees.
Yeah.
Who do you have next to? I assume you're in a 4-2-3-1 as well. Who do you have next to Rice?
Yes, I debated whether to go 4-2-3-1 or go for just the one holder, which we did see against Latvia. I actually think, having seen the recent performances of Rice against Real Madrid, being the man of the match on both legs against the biggest and best team in the world, I and that wasn't from a defensive perspective so much. That was more going forward,
Well, he did have his
and not to
moments
mention
in breaking up the midfield too, but I
he
agree. The
did,
free
he did,
kicks.
yeah, the free kicks, but also just the range of passing that he displayed. I think because he's tall and strong and aggressive, we all think yes, he's a great holding midfielder, which he is, but we think that's all he's going to be. A bit like how people used to look at Scott McTominay because he was big and tall, and then he became Man United's top scorer for a while.
Different level
So
of player, but yeah.
yes, but I think that's a more extreme
Mm.
example that proves my point. Rice is a more nuanced player than that. He's good in everything, but because he's been a holding midfielder for so long, we forget that he's just as good going forward. He's great in that box to box role, and he assisted both of Kane's goals under Tuchel so far. I think actually having him as the sole holder really negates what he can offer. I think you need a more traditional holder to unlock him, and unfortunately that does come at the cost of Palmer or Foden starting in the 10. But I think you have to have someone other than Bellingham playing deeper alongside him because otherwise Rice is too restricted.
Mm.
And so that means you've got Bellingham at the 10, I think, and then it comes down to who do you have beside Rice?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. As
Hmm.
much as I think if you're looking at personnel wise, I think the best midfield three is Rice, Bellingham, and Palmer. But
I agree. Yes, yes,
uh,
absolutely.
what a lot of England fans don't understand is that football is not played based on who has the best players. It's how who has
Hence
the best
why
players.
Spain beat us.
Yeah, it's who has the best
Yeah,
players that fit into the best system, right?
yes.
And
Hmm.
a lot of people are going to say Wharton.
Hmm.
I, I, I don't know. Some people are going to say Curtis Jones, which I
Mm.
think he's maybe a bit too attacking to be a true
Yeah,
six.
I don't see him as a holder. I think I have got him as a consideration, but I don't think he's a holder.
And then it's Kobe Mainu, who's not been
Yeah,
very good this season, if we're being honest.
but he's been injured. He's
Yeah.
struggled with form. I think he will be back to his old ways
Who
and
have you
then
got
some.
in
He was
midfield?
young. I'm really stuck on this one, to be honest. I mean, the sad thing is that they're missing the holders of old, like the
Mm.
Jordan Hendersons, and the Calvin Phillips. Calvin Phillips back in the day would have been a great choice for this because he unlocked Rice in the past in Euro 2020, but obviously he's not in contention anymore. Neither is Jordan Henderson for the same reasons. So I'm really stuck on this because I think it's kind of between those three. Maybe it's gonna have to be Wharton because he's the most traditional holding midfielder of the three of them.
I think what it's going to be is that unfortunately, because of the personnel, Rice is just not going to be able to maraud forward to the same extent when England play the
Yeah.
bigger teams. And that's
Mhm.
why I think it's going to be Rice and Jones. And that's a partnership we've seen in recent England games under Tuchel. I can't remember which one it
Mhm.
was. Was it the Albania game or the Latvia game where they started together?
It was the Albania game because
Mhm.
Latvia he had Bellingham deeper.
Yeah. So, and I think what you have there is you have two box to box midfielders. So
Mhm.
whichever one gets forward, the other one sort of covers,
Yeah.
and they sort of work as a
Yeah.
duo. And I think that makes more sense than what I would consider a lesser player in Wharton stepping in, who is good,
Oh,
but I
he's a lesser
think,
player,
yeah,
but
I
he's a
think,
better defender.
yeah, he's also a bit more raw. I think, and it's a bit early for him to be
Yes,
starting for England.
it
I
is.
think.
It is.
Um, so are we going Jones and Rice, or do you feel passionately another way?
I think it will end up being Kobe Mainoo, to be honest.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I think that's who it will end up being, partly because of his experience in the tournament last year, and he was much more effective than Trent was when he came in and replaced him. Now that's because Trent is not a midfielder, as we saw. That experiment didn't work. But when Mainu came in, it was more solid. It was more effective, and I think he's had bad form because he's been injured, and he's so young, and the ceiling is so high for him. I do think in another 14 months' time, he's going to be
Yeah,
a completely different player all over again. So I think it will end up being him. So this is a hard one, but I think yeah, maybe if we're going right now, we do have to pick Curtis Jones.
I
I'm
do
not,
think I'm a
I
Liverpool
don't love
fan.
that pick, but
I'm a Liverpool fan, and I think Kobbie Mainoo is a better overall player than Curtis Jones. But I
oh yeah,
think
he is.
that Curtis Jones, well, I don't know, saying it out loud, I think let's go Kobbie Mainoo.
That's
I
who it.
think,
I'm sure that's who it will be.
yeah,
I'm really convinced
I
by
think
that.
that's very possible. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's perhaps hard to pick him right now because he's not been fit. But I suppose I don't see his injury issue being a permanent one like Stones and James have. I think it's just how it is at the moment, and he's so young that he will go from strength to strength.
I think that leaves the rest of the team quite easy then, because we've already picked out
It does.
Saka and Kane.
Yeah.
Bellingham then slots in at the 10 because you have to play him. Because
Mhm.
I think aside from Saka, he is England's best player, probably second best player behind Saka. I know people still say
Well,
Kane,
I'd
but
I'd still say that overall, I think overall Kane is their best player. The others are much more talented than him. I think this season has confirmed two things for me. Kane is still the most dangerous player for an opposition to go against, but also it's confirmed what we've already known, which is that he struggles to step up in the most important moments, in the most important games. And I think Saka and Bellingham have proven that they can do that. And
Bellingham
I
not
think
so
that
much
is
this season, but for Real Madrid last season
but
and
he
for England
has.
in the Euros, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Whereas unfortunately, that's Kane's big weakness.
I think then that just leaves left wing, which
Mhm.
seems fairly straightforward to me. It doesn't seem
I've
like
gone Gordon.
Tuchel. Yeah, it doesn't seem like Tuchel wants to play Foden on the left because why would you?
No,
It hasn't worked out. That was clearly just forcing him into the team. I could see a world where Cole Palmer slots in quite nicely on the left, better than Foden, but I don't think that is
perhaps.
as optimal as having a direct winger like Anthony Gordon because then you have
I completely agree,
direct wingers
especially with Kane up front.
besides. Hmm.
Kane is so effective when he's got runners that will cut inside around him. And I think I think Palmer would slightly undermine what Kane brings for you besides the goals. I think it's so because England for a long time struggled because they were relying so much on Kane being the sole goal scorer, and then you had the likes of Saka and Bellingham coming in and taking over some of that load from him, which was so important. And he's brilliant when he's got runners around him and he can play those stunning long passes that we see him do all the time. And I just don't think Palmer would do that on the left wing, which is why I think having a direct player like Gordon or Rashford, depending on Rashford's form now that he's on loan at Villa, is the way to go. That's why I haven't gone for Eze as much as I love Eze as a player. I think he's more of a wide creator. He's as much of a number 10, and the same with Jack Grealish, where they're not they're not inside forwards. They're kind of wide playmakers, and I don't think that's what they need because they've already got playmakers in the team. I think you need those direct runners who can also be a goal threat, and
Especially if
that's
Trent
Gordon or
plays.
Rashford.
If Trent plays,
Yes,
that
yeah,
even sort of blows up even more, which he does in our lineup. I think the one player that makes it a bit interesting is Jared Bowen, but because he's
yeah,
more comfortable on the right, I think
left-footed.
Anthony Gordon
Yeah,
Anthony Gordon takes it.
absolutely,
So that
he does.
means our England lineup as of the 21st of April,
Yeah,
2025 is Pickford, Alexander Arnold, Stones, Gahey, Lewis Skelly, Rice,
hmm
Mainu, Bellingham, Saka, Gordon, Kane.
yeah, I'm happy with
Interesting.
that.
I think it's one of those where it looks really strong in a lot of positions, and there's a couple of positions where you think, eh. But you get that with a lot of national teams, and it's all about how they gel together. You know, the Spain team that won the
hmm
Euros, they had Laporte at centre back, who plays in the Saudi league, and
Yeah, yeah.
Marc Cucurella at
Well,
left
they
back, who turned out to be
Well, they had
brilliant in
French
that
players
tournament.
at centre back, remember?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And Morata was amazing in that tournament, and he's become a bit of a laughing stock for years.
yeah, not necessarily for his goals, more so for his general play, but they
Hmm
sort of played it through Yamal
Yeah,
and Nico Williams and
brilliant.
Pedri when he was fit, and
Yeah,
Rodri obviously. But
yeah.
the rest of the team was kind of just flowing in and out. Fabian Ruiz was very good as well. But
hmm
yeah, so it'd be interesting to see how it goes. I think in terms of England's chances to win it, I think maybe you and I, Ben, could do a separate video at some point down the line looking at the favourites for the World Cup generally.
Yeah.
Um,
hmm
I don't know how you feel. I think I put England at third favourites. I think it would have been fourth, but Germany with the other team there, third or fourth. And I think because Kroos, Neuer, and Gundogan have all retired, and Musiala and Wirtz are struggling with injuries,
hmm
you hope those two are going to come back from those injuries strong. But
I think they will. I
they
think they
will.
will.
But I think
But
it's
you
just a
never
slight
know.
niggle. It's a slight niggle, and that
Yeah,
those are two of the best players on the planet. And if
yeah.
Germany are going to do well, they need them fully firing, and they're just getting niggly hamstring and groin injuries, which you
Yeah.
never like to see. So I would put Germany as fourth favourites. I put England at three behind Spain and Argentina, I think, at the moment.
Not France.
I don't, I think that Deschamps, I think he should have gone after the Euros. I think they got very lucky to get as far as they did. Um, they didn't put in one convincing performance, in my opinion. I
They
think their
didn't.
best
No,
performance was
no.
against Spain in the game they lost. Um,
And
and even
even that
then,
wasn't very
well,
convincing.
even then, Spain were the better team, but that was France's best performance because they
Yeah,
had
yeah,
to
yeah,
play up
yeah,
to their
yeah,
opposition, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think. Yeah, France not looking great. Portugal, I think that ship's kind of sailed. The
Ronaldo
Netherlands,
need
the Netherlands are
needs
going
to
to
look.
be dangerous. Brazil look a complete mess. But this is a whole other video. I think England
Yeah.
are our third favourites. I think
That's fine. I'm
Argentina.
not sure about Argentina though. I definitely wouldn't have Argentina that high up, I don't think.
I think you just got to look at it. They just beat Brazil 4-1, and Messi and Lautaro Martinez were both injured. And I just think
Martinez is excellent as well. I
under
think he
Scaloni, they've just got this passion and team ethic. And if you look
yeah,
throughout their team,
they
it
always
doesn't
had that.
look
Yeah.
on paper as good as Spain or England or France, but there's just something about them. They're really tough to beat. And I think if anybody goes to penalties against Argentina, they're going to
Oh
bottle
yeah.
it. They're not going to fancy it at all. So
You don't want to take a penalty against Emi Martinez.
I think Spain are the favourites, but I think Argentina are in at second just because of their pedigree. They've won the last two Copa Americas. They won the last World Cup. I
Yeah.
think they are. the most formidable international team. But anyway, there's that we can get in depth on that another
There's
time.
a lot to unpack there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But my point is, I think that England are right up there.
They are. They
And
are.
but it is going to be a big sink or swim. It's going to either go up in flames and be a disaster, I think, and Tuchel's going to throw his toys out the pram, or it's going to be a genius appointment and it's going to work out really well. I don't really see anything in the middle. They're either going to be in the final or they're going to be out a lot earlier than people want, and they're going to be wishing that Southgate was still there with that team unity.
Oh, I feel like it's got a quarterfinal exit written all over this.
You think? Yeah.
Same old, same old.
Well, now that there's going to be a round of 32 as well as the round of 16 and the quarterfinals, it's
Mm.
expanded World Cup. It's a different kettle of fish. But anyway, that was a very long-winded discussion talking about England. The most England content you're going to get on this channel at one go.
Uh,
But Ben will be back to discuss England and more things World
yeah.
Cup as we get nearer the time. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. Go check out the back catalogue of videos. I covered the last international break. I've got a video coming up on the US men's national team and what the hell is going on there. I'll probably also do a video on Brazil because that is a fascinating situation in itself. There's so much to talk about, such little time. But yes, thanks, Ben, once again for joining. And hopefully, I'll see you all again for another video.